The State Department has urged Canada and Saudi Arabia to resolve their escalating feud. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has expelled the Canadian ambassador, cut trade ties with Canada, suspended flights to the country, terminated a student exchange program, and has stopped all of Saudi Arabia's medical treatment programs in Canada. This is all in response to a tweet from Canada calling on Saudi Arabia to release a detained human rights activist. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert says the U.S. has raised the issue with the Saudis.
We have a regular dialogue with the government of Saudi Arabia on human rights and also other issues. This particular case regarding Canada, we have raised that with the government of Saudi Arabia. They're friends, they're partners, as is Canada as well. Both sides need to diplomatically resolve this together. We can't do it for them. They need to resolve it together. The United States has respect for international recognized freedoms and also individual liberty. That certainly has not changed. And that's basically where we stand today. But we would encourage both governments to work out their issues together. It's a diplomatic issue. Saudi Arabia and Canada can certainly stand to work it out together. We would encourage the government of Saudi Arabia overall to address and respect due process and also publicize information on some of its legal cases.
For more on this now, I want to bring in Washington Post Foreign Affairs writer Ishaan Tharoor. Ishaan, thanks for joining us. I remember when I first sort of read about this a couple of days ago, I thought, wow, things really escalated rather rapidly. And now we're hearing that Canada is expected to ask some of the other allies, like the UK and the United Arab Emirates, to maybe help resolve this spat. We just heard the official United States of America sort of point of view on this, which is basically they've raised the issue with Saudi Arabia, but, you know, U.S. and the Saudi Arabia, maybe you guys can figure out how to handle it on your own. What does this really say about the U.S., its influence, its willingness to get involved in this sort of thing?
It's a fascinating moment, and it does tell us a lot of things. Look, for whatever the State Department just said about its commitment to rule of law and human rights and the same issues that the Canadians brought up last week, which triggered this whole crisis. You saw President Trump last year go to Saudi Arabia, deliver a big address where he signaled rather emphatically a retreat from this position where the United States would champion democracy and human rights around the world. We know for a fact that this White House is not that interested in pushing a rights-first agenda, especially with major partners like Saudi Arabia. And what's been fascinating to also watch is that, and yes, absolutely, these moves by the Saudis did take a lot of people by surprise. They seem to be treating Canada not as a major NATO player, a G7 member alongside the United States, but as a kind of pesky neighbor, the way the Saudis have been treating the Qataris as well in their ongoing blockade. Not only are they severing ties, they're trying to sell off all the Canadian assets they own. They're trying to really hurt Canada. And it's sent a very interesting and stark message.
So then, you know, the question is why? This is a tweet from, I think, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I mean, it wasn't even like it came from Justin Trudeau or something like that. Why such an extreme reaction? Well, the Saudis are always rather sensitive about being lectured by the West about their government, about their nature of their politics, about human rights and so on. They keep on saying that this is our judicial system working. You can't criticize us for this. People close to Riyadh have told me that their Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is under a lot of pressure as he tries to steer through liberalizing reforms, and the lecturing of the West doesn't help. But yes, it is rather surprising to see this really emphatic response. And it's not clear how it really helps the Saudis. If this is how they're going to treat the Canadians over a series of tweets, it's going to have a chilling effect on the way a whole suite of other Western countries deal with Saudi Arabia, and it will also affect the way foreign businesses want to interact with Saudi Arabia. So speaking of the Crown Prince, Ishaan, in your write-up on the story, you give us some really good background on Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his relationship with the U.S. And recently, he actually talked about this on 60 Minutes, an interview with CBS This Morning co-host Norah O'Donnell. I want to play a bit of what he had to say in that interview and then get your reaction.
President Trump is the elected U.S. president, and the Saudi-American relations are historic, going back nearly 80 years. In fact, Saudi Arabia is the oldest ally to the U.S. in the Middle East, before any other country.
One of the things that President Trump has talked about is Middle East peace. He has his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, working on that. That's part of his portfolio. I know that you've met with him. Have you discussed Middle East peace with him?
صحيح جرد هو المكلف.
That's right. Jared is assigned this portfolio by the White House.
وواجبنا كسعوديين بدنا نطور علاقتنا.
Our duty as Saudis is to improve relations with our allies and with all representatives of these institutions.
Does President Trump's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem help or hurt the peace process?
احنا نحاول انه
We try to focus on the efforts that promote peace for all. We do not try to focus on anything that might create tension. It is my nature always to be positive.
فأنا بطبعي دائما إيجابي.
So, I try to focus on the things that will support the interests of the Palestinian people and the interests of all.
Okay, so a little bit talking about the peace process, but he did say he focuses on things that will contribute to peace for all, no tension in the region. This is not in the region; it's with Canada. But what do you make of what the Crown Prince has to say and how he's choosing to act? You write in your piece that this is sort of a delicate time for him because he is sort of simultaneously gripping harder in terms of his power, but also, sort of making some liberal moves as well.
Right. Well, he embarked on this incredibly high-profile publicity tour through Europe and the U.S. earlier this year. He visited a bunch of cities in the United States. He visited major capitals in Europe. He stopped by our offices here at the Washington Post. And he really sold this vision of him liberalizing Saudi Arabia, reforming Islam, and making the Middle East the next Europe, which is words that he said himself. And it's interesting, as the clip indicated, he does have a very close relationship with Jared Kushner, and he is very eager to change the story in the Middle East. And that includes, resolving the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The problem for him is that he is not the only power center in Riyadh. He has a lot of enemies in the court and a lot of forces pushing against what he's doing. And especially when he seemed to indicate that he was not that interested in Palestinian demands, there are traditional forces in Riyadh who have pushed back. You saw the king last week issue a statement basically rebuking the White House's efforts so far, which you could read as also a rebuke to the Crown Prince, who, when you talk to him, is far less interested in sort of the rights of Palestinians than he is, say, the wonderfulness of the Israeli tech sector, which he keeps on talking about.
Do you think he's trying to make an example out of Canada, sort of a way of saying, look, I have a lot to deal with here, and I will not abide by any distractions, no matter where it comes from?
Look, this is one of the more plausible readings of the moment that the Saudis, they have had similar incidents with smaller countries like Sweden and Denmark, and that they like to posture like this. But the fact that this has escalated the way it has so dramatically and doesn't show many signs of tailing off, it does show a certain miscalculation on their part, similar to the ways they have miscalculated in other fronts, including their blockade of Qatar. So this is part of an aggressive streak in Saudi foreign policy that has come about in the last couple of years since the ascension of this youthful crown prince.
All right, Ishaan Tharoor, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
A group of Tesla